if you understand trauma, is that your brain and perceptual system gets rewired, so you see things almost entirely through the past experience rather than current experience.
Okay, so if I'm traumatized, talking about my trauma doesn't necessarily fix my trauma.
Trauma is a speechless experience. So we did the first neuroimaging study about people reliving their trauma, and we saw that the entire cognitive part of their brain disappears. That when you're in your trauma, you're just one ball of emotion, and there's no thinking. So you're confused, you're befuddled. It is, as Shakespeare says, you suffer from speechless terror. You become dumbfounded. And so the whole traumatic experience is just beyond belief. And so you stay in a state of confusion and agitation, and then finding language for yourself at this point is terribly important to help you to begin to organize your relationship to yourself. It's not enough, but language and defining your inner experience is terribly important.
The word trauma, as you say, has been thrown around a lot. And it's become a bit of a cultural joke to some people. When you say, something happens to you, you go, oh, I feel triggered, I'm traumatized, etc. What actually does count as trauma?
Trauma really is an overwhelming experience of, oh my God. When something happens and you're completely helpless and there's nothing in you that knows how to deal with it.
People talk a lot about small t trauma and big T trauma.
I'm not a fan of that.
Okay, explain why not.
You need to be more accurate. But the small t trauma is a very real trauma when your environment around you doesn't acknowledge your existence. Most people, for example, after natural disasters, do very well because people get together after natural disasters. I've seen it where we have a cabin in northern Vermont. We've had terrible floods. The neighbors get together, they help each other, and you get a sense of cohesion, actually, and a sense of meaning. We're doing this together. The small t traumas have to do with not acknowledging that what's going on with you. Saying to kids, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. No, you don't matter. No, actually, your dad is a drunk because you are such a difficult kid that your father was doing okay until you came into this family and you were too much for him and you caused him to be the person that he is. So I think that people mean small t trauma. It's a relational trauma, which is a very big deal for most of the people I get to see in my practice. Most people come in not because of big T traumas. It is because nobody saw me. Nobody heard me. I was relevant. We always had to take care of my mom or my dad, but there was no room for us.
So if you get fired from your job and it's a traumatic event for you because you get, I don't know, you lose your friends, you lose the job, your parents are embarrassed about you. Can that become trauma, something like that?
Yes, you could, depending on how you define it. And for some people it doesn't, for some people it doesn't. Depends again on the context. For some people you get fired, you go like, well, I didn't like those assholes anyway. Or
I ask this because I'm wondering if there's a lot of people listening now that I'm trying to understand if their small experience, which other people think is trivial, actually could have resulted in some kind of deeper trauma response.
Absolutely. At the end, the issue is the perception.
Your perception.
Your perception. The issue is not the event itself. You and I may have had the same event happening. And for me, it reminds me about my brother torturing me, or it reminds me about my mom being sick and not paying attention to me or whatever. And for me, it becomes a very big deal. And for you, it goes like, but I have so many talents. Why not try something else?
And can you give me an overview of the work you've done in your life that have fed into all of the knowledge and information that you have, just for anyone that might not know who you are? What is that sort of body of work?
I had a very good psychiatric training in one of the Harvard hospitals. And then I ran the last state mental hospital in Boston, which was also interesting. I it was a sanctuary for very disturbed people. And so that institution gets closed. I go work at the Veterans Administration Hospital. I met these guys who were people who I looked up to. They were good athletes, competent people, helicopter pilots, all my age. And these guys had broken apart. And they had fallen apart. And I go, oh. And they reminded me of some of my relatives who I grew up with, who also had been concentration camp survivors and Japanese camp survivors. And then I learned much else after that. But that really opened up my eyes to that people can be broken by life experiences. And that really intrigued me tremendously.